Hi guys, Samantha from Jessica Tutorials here, and today I'm going to show you how to create faux opal. So what you're going to need to start is you're going to need some translucent clay, and I'm going to be using Primo today. I'm also going to be using powder in a different variation of the tutorial so we can see the two beads and the difference between them. So I'm going to be making one with Primo and one with powder, just so you can see the difference. Next you're going to need some dichroic, and now you can get it in film like this, so you can see it, that colour shifts, or you can get it in packs like this. See? And so when you get it in pieces of film like this, all you would do is you would fold it over and just roll it up into a roll like this, and then snip it all the way down until you got strips like this. And so this is what I've got, and I've chosen blue today because that's the one that I want to go with. Now what you need to do is you just want to go through all of this, and you want to chop it as fine as you can because we're going to add this to the polymer clay, and the finer it is the better. So just grab a bunch and start putting it through some scissors and chop it as finely as possible. And now what I want to do is I want to take this blue that I have over here, and I also want to take some of this white, and I want to mix it together. And so I'll chop all of that finely, mix it together all nicely so that we have a nice pile of dichroic, and then I'll show you how to add it to the two translucent clays that we are going to be using. And now again, I just want to emphasize how important it is to get this as fine as possible. You'll find out later in the process that it's much easier to chop it now than it is later. Okay, so now we are ready to start adding the dichroic to our pieces. So I have a piece of powder here, and we don't need all of that. We can add more later if we need. Got a piece of powder, and I have a piece of Primo. Let me just get rid of some of that. It's always better to start with less. Okay, then I've got the dichroic. I decided not to add the white after all, just want to add the blue. So I'm just going to add a bit onto there. And a bit onto there. There we are. Pop that out the way. Okay, and then I'm just going to fold this over to trap the dichroic in there. And then I'll start kneading it into the Primo first. So I'll just scoop up all these bits and fold it, and I'm going to start by hand pressing it because that dichroic needs to be worked into the polymer clay, and it's not going to like it. It's not going to be happy with you, so you've got to force it into there by hand. You can use a roller if you want, but the dichroic isn't going to stick to the polymer clay, and so you might find that your layers start to come apart and stick to your roller, and it just becomes a mess. So it's better to just start squishing it by hand and get it into that clay a bit, and then you can start with the roller. But we don't really need the roller because I've got it in there pretty nicely. And now you can see that these pieces are absolutely massive and we don't need them that big. So I'm going to bring over my scissors again, and we're now going to chop the clay into pieces, and by doing this we'll be chopping the dichroic into pieces as well. And I would repeat this process for the powder as well. It's a bit of a sticky process and it takes time, but it's best. So you just have to clean off your scissors every now and then. So don't use a good pair of scissors. You want to be using some old pair that you don't need for anything else, because this is going to gum it up a bit and dull it quite quickly. And just make sure that your scissors are clean, because you don't want stuff getting all over your Primo either, or your translucent anyway. Then once you've chopped it into little bits, squish it all back up again and repeat the process until you have your pieces of dichroic quite fine. And I'll show you what that looks like when I am done, which could be in about half an hour's time. Okay, so here they are now that I have finished chopping up the dichroic and getting it as fine as I possibly can. It's a bit of work, but you get a much higher concentration of these lovely sparkly dichroics than you would if you just use Primo's plain Opal. Another thing that you could do to boost your dichroic if you had the Primo Opal is to, instead of starting with translucent like I did here, you could start with the Primo Opal and then add the dichroics as we did. But I did it just with plain Primo because the dichroics in the Primo aren't the right colour for my liking. I much more prefer this really beautiful blue colour. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this Primo. I'm not going to do it with this one, which is our Pardo one. And I'm just going to flatten it out a bit. There we go. And this is optional. You don't have to do this, but it just boosts that sparkle a bit more. Is to put in ice resin opals, and I am using crystal opal. There are lots of other ones that you can get, like this is a fire opal one, but obviously that wouldn't work with the blue that we've got here. So I'm going to be using this crystal opal to give a little bit more of a colour difference. So I'll just open that up, and these are all nice and chopped fine already. So if you could find a blue version of these, that would be great, and then you wouldn't have to chop it all, which is a bit of a mission. But anyway, I'll add some of that. Close that back up, because those will blow all over the place. And then close that up, and then start smushing. And fold, and smush, and fold, and smush. Until you work that into the pieces, into the clay. You don't want to be putting this through the pasta machine, and you don't really want to be doing it with the acrylic roller either, because as you can see, the layers will come apart and can be a little problematic in the beginning. So just work it in by hand at first, and then you can move on to the acrylic roller. I personally don't like using the pasta machine, even when I have worked the stuff in, because first off, it can rip away some of the dichroic. The dichroic can get stuck to the rollers and things, and it's also not really very good for your pasta machine to put clays that have inclusions through the rollers, because it can scratch your rollers. So I just prefer to do it by hand. Okay, so that's properly incorporated, so I can see some other pieces of dichroic in there. And so there we are. And by doing all of this mixing and chopping and stuff, we will have conditioned our clay, and so it will be easy to work with. Now, I do want to warn you though that you do want to use this opal as quickly as possible. Get it into a usable veneer as quickly as possible, because a day or so from now it's going to become really hard, really crumbly, and it's just going to break apart. Which is why if you've ever used Primo Opal, you've most likely struggled with it and had it really crumbly. This is because of the inclusions in it. So you will want to use this very quickly because it's nice and conditioned now. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to rip this in half, and one part I want to set aside because I want to keep it the way it is, and the other half I want to tint with some alcohol ink. And I'm going to do the same for the Pardo over here. And the Pardos are quite a bit harder than the Primo, but it's workable as well. So there we are. Now I'll bring over the alcohol ink. And I'm going to be using Pinata Baja Blue. You can also use, if you have Adirondack, you can use the sailboat blue. That one works pretty well for this. Yeah, that will work. Okay, so now I'm just going to flatten these out a bit because it will help me later on, and I'm just going to put these two aside because I want to keep those nice and clean. And I'll just roll these two pieces out. You can see that the Primo is definitely softer than the Pardo, but it's also more yellow. So Pardo is going to give us probably a much clearer image. So then I'll bring over the piñata and open it up. And I'm going to drop 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't really matter how many drops you add. The more drops you add, the stronger your colour will be. That's all you're basically dictating. So I don't really have an exact amount. You just want a nice dark ocean blue colour that's going to contrast against your more plain colour. Okay, and then what you want to do is you just want to spread that out and then let that sit for a little while and let the ink dry, and then we can mix it in. There we are, let them dry quite a bit. So now I'm just going to pick them up, each of them, put them one off to the side. Now start mixing this in. Again, you don't really want to be doing this to your pasta machine because it's going to make a big mess. And now I'm not worrying about introducing air bubbles into this translucent, if you're wondering, because a lot of my mixing is just, you know, kind of kneading in like you would bread dough, and so it is going to introduce quite a few air bubbles, but to a certain degree that is something that I want, because you're going to then get a lot of mooning at the end of this and create some interesting effects, which is what you want with a faux stone. Okay, and I'm just going to be pressing this all together. You can see that dichroic flashing around in there, which is really nice. There we are. So that's the Primo. You can see the dichroic in there. Put that aside, and now I'll mix up the Pardo. Okay, so now we have these four. So these are the Primo ones, and these are the Pardo ones. So we'll start with the Primo ones, and then you can just repeat the process for the Pardo if you wanted to. You're also going to need another piece of plain translucent, whichever one you started with. So in this case I'm going to be using Primo. Now just a quick forenote, before you go chucking anything sparkly into your clay, just do a test bake beforehand, because sometimes what looks like it might be able to stand the heat that the polymer clay is going to be going into, it might not. It might melt inside your clay and then it makes a big mess. So just take a small piece of whatever you want to add into the clay, put it in the oven at the temperature you're going to use it at, and just double check that it's compatible, because sometimes something that looks like it'll be fine isn't, and then you end up with a disaster later on. Another thing is I'm using Primo and Pardo, but you can use any translucent you want. The only one that I wouldn't recommend are Fimo and Kato, because they aren't very translucent, but Cernit would work pretty well. Primo White would work pretty well, and I'm sure there are others that I'm missing, but any translucent that you think is translucent enough will work. Now let's get on with the tutorial. So we'll start with this. What I want to do is I want to break off a tiny piece, or a small piece, not tiny, and I want to start roll it into a log. Now because of all the dichroic in there, it's not going to roll smoothly, so you're going to have to coax it. If it starts to break apart, just pinch it to get rid of any air bubbles, and then continue rolling. And roll it into a nice thin piece like that. Then take a piece of your next colour, and now this doesn't have to be in any particular order. You just want to add all of the colours and pop them into snakes like this, and then we can pop them together. So you can see that this one's also giving me a little bit of trouble when it comes to staying together. And don't try to get your snakes even either. They don't have to all be the same width. along the length, so you can see that we have thicker spots and thinner spots. That's perfectly fine, you don't have to worry about that. And sometimes make some of your snakes a little bit thicker than others, maybe make them thinner. Just muck around and just experiment around and try to be somewhat random but in a controlled manner, if you know what I'm saying. Because when it comes to imitating something natural, it's chaotic in a very orderly manner. And so you have to try and get that balance right to get it to look quite realistic. So I'll just continue popping these pieces in any way that I want, in the order that I want, and then once I've ended up with a veneer that I like, I'll show you what to do next. So I'm just popping them in at random. Okay, so I have finished up both pieces. So this is the Primo one, and this is the Pardo one. So you can see that. So you can see that I've just done them at random. So let me just remove the Pardo one, so we have space to do a Primo one. And what I want to do now is I want to roll this flat. So I'll bring over my acrylic roller and roll in the direction of the lines. And you want to roll it completely flat. Okay, there we go. Then what I want to do, pick that up and just check this side, and I just want to fold it in half, following those lines, and then I will roll flat again. And again, I want to be doing this by hand so that I've got as much control as possible. And I'm only going to do that once, because although you can't really see it now, I'm not sure if the camera is able to pick up, but I can see over here that these lines aren't going to match up perfectly, and that's not really what they're supposed to do. It's supposed to just add a little bit of depth to the piece, and so you've got multiple lines like that. Okay, then I'm going to bring over some sort of a pin, and I'm just going to use this pin, and I want to start streaking across here to distort these lines just a bit, to give them a little bit of a frilling. And you want to go in the same direction each time. You want to go either down or up, you don't want to go sideways. And you'll just carry on doing this, because we're just trying to get these lines to be a little bit more organic. We don't want them so straight. So I'm just busy adding lines, and you want lots and lots of lines, so I'll go back and add some in other areas, and so I'll work on this for quite a while, putting in as many lines as I can, and then I would flatten it out, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second, as soon as I'm done here. There we are. Now what we want to do is bring over our roller again and flatten those lines out, and it will have given a little bit of marbling along those edges. Well, not marbling, some kind of streaking marks, so that they don't look so straight. And I'm just busy rolling it out, making sure that I get rid of all those lines. Okay, so you can see that those are a little bit more fractured. Now what I want to do is pick this up, and I want to manipulate it in such a way that these lines aren't sitting straight. So just twisting and turning the sheet, getting these lines to not sit perfectly anymore, because we don't want them sitting like that. You can probably hear the parrots outside sitting in the tree making a noise again. But there we are. Hopefully you can see that that's distorting the lines a little bit. Might stretch some and bend them. Again, this is all about making it look as natural as possible. And here's what it looks like on the other side without the streaking, if you wanted to see. So it's not a huge difference, but I can see the difference between the two. So it's definitely worth doing. Just gonna carry on mucking around with those lines. And I might use my fingers as well to smush up these individual lines. And now you might not see too many pieces of dichroic. They're not as shiny as they will be yet. Once we have baked it, the translucent will clear up. And also the resin at the end plays a big part in clearing up as well. So it will definitely be more shiny towards the end. There we are, so we've distorted that quite a bit. Now bring over your roller and roll that flat again, because you don't want all these pits in it. There we are. Just check it to see if it's flat, and then I want to just one more time do some streaking. Okay, now I'm just going to flatten it out quickly, and then we can see what it looks like. And this should be the final step. Just make sure that you flatten it out properly though, because you don't want those lines there, because they will affect our crackle later on. Because if there are any lines for the clay to split along, that will affect your crackle, because the clay will prefer to split along that, and so it won't look very natural. So just make sure that you clean up all of those lines. And you can just check from the side, shine a light on it, and those lines will show up pretty well. And there we are. I'm pretty happy with how that looks. And now I do the exact same thing with the powder. And this is your official veneer. Now you can use it like this if you want to. It looks pretty good as it is. But we are trying to actually make Boulder opal. And so if we were making normal opal, I might have wanted to fold it in half a few more times before we did the streaking, so that it was a little bit more blended. But because we're doing Boulder opal, I want to put in cracks, and so this is sufficient enough, because when we put the cracks in, it's going to break it up a bit, and so we're not going to get as much definition as if we hadn't done the cracks. So I'm just making sure that I'm getting all of those lines. There we are. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go with my finger and muck around with these bits, just to wonk up these lines a bit more, because the more wonky they are, the more natural they look. You just take your hands and press them. And this works well with many different stones, if you're wondering. So if you've watched my tiger eye tutorial, this is something you could do. Maybe with malachite it would work pretty well as well. We think agate would also work. This is a nice technique for the agate. And even if you're just making something like wood grain, it probably would look quite nice to do wonking up the lines like I am. So it's a technique that you could use in multiple situations. Okay, now I'm just flattening it out nicely, ready for us to use. Let me just feel across that. Pretty happy. Bring over the blade And so you can see the front over here, and this is what it looks like without the streaks, and this is what it looks like with the streaks. So you can see it looks quite a bit more natural. I'm just going to stretch this out, and now don't worry about running this through the pasta machine, just keep it the way it is, because we are going to be putting resin on this. So I want to show you the difference between that one and the powder one that we have over here, so you can see what difference we have taken it from. This one looks very non-organic. Well, this one does look quite nice. So now we'll put this aside, or at least I will, and I'm going to do the same for the powder one, and then I can show you what beads we're going to cut out, and we're going to go for a fairly simple design today, but you can use any jewellery design you want. You can have a look back at some of my previous tutorials to see some other designs that you could use this with, but personally I think this looks much better with a simplistic design. And so once we've cut out the beads, then we can crackle it, pop it in the oven, and then we can antique it and continue with our project. Okay, so I have finished the powder one, so let me just quickly bring that over for you to see. So you can see it's a little bit more white and not as translucent as the primer at the moment. It will be a lot more translucent when it's baked. But for now we're going to work with the primer one. Now I have a sheet of Primo White over here that was run out on the thickest setting of my pasta machine, and this is because I want the background for my translucent to be quite light. And so if you wanted a dark opal effect, you could put it on maybe a grey or black background. So play around with your backgrounds and see what you can come up with. You might be able to come up with something really cool. So if you'd maybe use different colours, so the ink had maybe been a red or an orange, and you'd use these fire opals, you might have wanted to put on a black background, and so that would be something interesting to think about. I might do something like that, I might not. You'll see at the beginning of the tutorial or at the end of the tutorial if I did. If I didn't, then I didn't, but that is just something to think about. Okay, so now that's popped onto the sheet of white. Now I am going to bring over the cutters. As soon as I've just cleared that out the way, I'm just going to pop that there so you can just see what I'm doing. And now the cutters that I'm going to be using are my teardrop set from my Etsy shop, and so you can see that I have an entire set over here. Got more cutters, which is quite nice, and so I'm not going to use the entire set. I just need to see how much I can fit on here. So what I would do is I would just take the cutters and fit them in just like this. This is a way to check how many you can fit into a sheet, because I do want to use all of these cutters if I can, and then we can have a nice graduated necklace. Okay, I should be able to fit all of them quite happily. Okay, so we'll start with the largest one, which is this one, and I'm just going to choose an area. I think I'm going to take out over here. So let me just move this forward so you can see what I'm doing a little bit better. Yeah, I think I'll take there. Cut that out, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep that cutter there because I don't need that one. And this means that I can bring this cutter as close as possible and press in right next to it, but I won't be distorting this one's shape because the cutter's still around it. And I'll keep that one in while I do this one. Now the important thing to remember, if you're going to be putting them in the same necklace, you want the stripes to be going in roughly the same direction. They don't have to all be sitting exactly right, but you do want it so that the stripes aren't going like that. And besides, you would want it that you can get as many stripes as possible into one bead. There we are. Now I'll bring over my largest one again. Bring that out. Start cutting over here. Swap over from that one. And I'll provide a link to these cutters. quite happy with how this opal turned out. It's even better than my last lot, which you might have seen on Facebook. I think I want to pop that there. Okay, there we are. Now, I don't really want it doing that. What I wanted to do is I want to work out all of the cutters and get them out of the way. Just like that. Just pick this up, get it out of the way. And now I want to just leave these the way they are. You can take your finger and smooth them off a bit. Just like that. And just get them nice and stuck to the tile. There we are. And now I'm going to bring over my heat gun. And I'm going to set my settings, and then I'm going to heat set these. Now the trick is to set them just enough that the top layer has been baked, but when you press on it, it should feel slightly squishy underneath. You want the rest of the bead to not be baked, because you want to take these and bend them slightly just to get a crackle, because you do need a crackle. Now the reason I didn't do this in the sheet is because it can make cutting them out a little difficult, and you can get rough edges and all sorts of things, especially with smaller shapes like this. With larger shapes like this, you could try cutting it out of a sheet that has been crackled, but it's just better to do it this way. Now, what you want to do is you want to let these sit and cool completely. They can't be warm at all, because otherwise you're going to find that they're going to smush and smear all over the place. So just allow them to cool. Maybe take the tile, pop it in the fridge to speed up the cooling, and then you can pick them up and I'll show you how to gently twist them to get that crackle. Okay, so I've picked them up off of the tile, and so you can see it back's still raw. Now what we want to do is a very delicate process. We want to start crackling it, and you can do this by pressing on this front bit. The trick is to try and not distort it too much. So you can roll it initially to give it a little bit of stress fractures, and then use your fingers to pull it apart. Now don't pull it too much, because we want to bring over the cutters again and use them to help us push it back into place. I'm going to use a skewer to roll across here so we can fracture it a bit more. I might even use the skewer to press. And now don't worry about uneven areas, that we can fix easily. Just worry about getting some nice fractures in there. Now I'll bring over my blade and gently start pressing this back in. And so if you're going to be using an exact shape like a square, you would want to do the crackle technique on the sheet and then try cutting it out, because as you can see, you're going to distort your shape just a bit. Which is fine with this one, because I can get it back into shape just by pressing it in, just like this. Just gently press it back in. There we are. And there we are, it's back in shape. I'll just gently press inside that cutter. And there we are, now we've got those fractures that we want. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll just pick that up and place it out of the way, and I will do that with all of the other ones. Now I just want to show you one where we just do it the traditional way, when we take our piece of clay, which is this one, and we crackle it. So let me just cut away all the excess areas so we don't waste clay. There we go. And I'll clean those up later on. But there we go. Now I'll bring over my heat gun and set it. There we are. Now what you want to do is you want to let that cool just like you did with the other ones, because you're going to get your crackle later on once it's finished cooling, but you should be able to run your hand over it without sticking. So I might start just using my fingers to create a crackle, just by pressing. Create a nice uneven natural crackle. Actually, I might want to heat gun this just a tad more. There we are. And then I'll continue cracking it. And now the more you heat gun it, the larger your cracks will be, but I'm looking for fairly fine cracks. And then I'll just use my roller to roll that out, and hopefully you can see those cracks. I'm just using my fingers instead of a pasta machine at the moment to get those cracks, because I want them to be quite natural looking, and then we'll cut out our beads. And now if you're not picking up your sheet, it is best to try and crack it while it is still warm. But if you want to put it through the pasta machine to crack it, wait until it's cooled, because otherwise it's going to get all smushy on you. Just making sure that I'm happy with those cracks. And now while it's warm, I want to cut out our pieces. So I'll bring over the teardrop and cut. Now while it's warm, it should be easier to cut. There we go, and I'm just going to leave these in those positions. Now again, by pressing your cutters in, you're going to be getting more fractures. There we go. Okay, so I can fit another size. So I'm just going slowly here, making sure that I can fit all the sizes that I need. Let me just recut that one. Okay, and then I'll bring over this size, see if I can cut it. I don't think I'm going to be able to. No, that's as many as I'm going to get. Okay, pull these out the way. And then lift this up, because this is cooling down. It has cooled down quite a bit. Move that out the way. And there, so you can see that the shape of these are a little bit wonky. and that's mainly due because of the crackles when we cut them out. So I just need to go and make sure that I'm happy with their shape before I continue, and maybe see if I can get a few more cracks. Might use the end of my skewer to coax some more cracks out of these. There we go. And so now what I would do is I'd wait for these to cool, or ideally leave them on the tile and then bake them, and then I would apply the backings to them. And now with these ones I am going to continue cracking them, and then you can see which ones you prefer when we're finished. Okay, so I have finished all of my beads and I've popped them on a piece of plain printing paper. So now I'm quite happy with them. I think they're stable enough for me to apply a backing now, which is better because the backs are still raw, so it will just adhere better and it will just be better overall. So I'm going to put a backing of pearl white on. So I have a piece of pearl white that was run out in the middle, set in my pasta machine. And I'm going to bring over a sponge that I got from Towards Polymer Clay, and I'm going to use this as texture. So I'll start from one end and roll that sponge over. Oops. And just, you can go over multiple times, just get a nice impression. There we are. I'm quite happy with that. Okay, then I'll move that out the way and bring over my blade and pick this up, and I'm going to flip it, and then I'm going to bring over each of my beads. Oops. And let me just move this down so you can see the beginning bit. And I'll lay my bead down and gently press it on, not pressing too hard, just pressing gently to get stick. Then I'll bring over my cutter. If you're wondering what that noise is in the background, the kookaburras have started. Cute bird they are. Okay, then I'll press that in, and then I'm going to just shuffle my cutter around to press in the edges. Then I'll move that out of the way. And then before I pick it up, I'm just going to use my blade to gently smooth in these edges so that they can all be nice and even, which is another reason why it's nice to do it while it is raw if possible. There we are. And bring over your finger and you want to smooth off these edges as much as possible, because we're not going to be doing a smear along these sides. So you want to do the tidying now. Just take your finger and gently smear along. Just smooth out any gaps. Just like that. Okay. And then I like to go back with my sponge texture. Just apply a little bit more if I can. And then just quickly reshape it and then pop it back onto a plain printing paper. And I would do that with all of my beads, and then I would bake them. Okay, so our pieces are out of the oven, and so here are what they look like. So these are the ones where we cut it out of our crackle sheet, and so I can tell the difference between these and the other ones, and personally I prefer the other ones where we cracked it after we had cut out the bead shapes, just because the edges are quite a bit more tidy, and I just I can tell the difference between the finishing, so I definitely prefer that. But I don't think the camera is going to be able to pick up on it as well as I would like it to, but definitely prefer it. So that's what they look like before you've antiqued them, and here's one that has been antiqued. I just wanted to see what it looked like. So now we want to antique all of these ones, and then we can tend to the backs and the edges and give them a really good sand. So I'll just move these out of the way and move all of these ones out of the way because we don't really need them in our way. And then I'll bring over some black paint, and this is just cheap black paint. You're going to need quite a bit. You want to take that and you want to rub it over the surface of your piece and really try to work it into those cracks. So your finger is definitely a good tool to use over here. So you can see that I'm really rubbing it. And I'm also going to rub these edges because sometimes we've got cracks coming down over here. And then I'll just also antique the back a little bit, and then we can sand that later. Okay, so then what we want to do is we want to bring over a cloth to wipe this off. And so I'm just going to use this wet wipe. And I'm gently just going to dab that off, and then you want to clean up your finger so you don't get this paint onto your bead by accident now that you want to clean it off. I'm just going to dab that, and don't be too aggressive with it. And you might find that you do need to antique it again if the paint hasn't stuck into those gaps like you wanted them to. And also, if it's not antiquing as nicely as you would like it to, you can always just wait for the paint to dry and then attempt wiping it off. If you can wipe it off while it's wet, it's always best, but sometimes you get a better antiquing by waiting for it to dry and then wipe it off. So I'm just really working it into those cracks as much as I can, just like that, and then I'm going to wait for that to dry. Okay, so I've finished antiquing them and I've wiped them down now that they have dried, and so you can see this is what they're going to look like. And now these are the primo ones, and they're not going to look as good as they could yet because the resin is going to clear this opal up quite dramatically later on. Once we have put the resin on, it clears up really nicely. There you are, that's what it looks like. And it's not going to be strung like that, of course. I'm just putting it all together so you can see what it looks like. Then we have the other ones over here, and these are the ones where we cut it out of a sheet that had cracks already. So you can see the cracks are quite different there. They have quite a different look to them, which is quite nice. So these are the ones that we put on a white background, and so they're going to look like this. Now I just want to bring over a wet wipe to show you what that's going to look like with the resin on it. Hopefully you can see it, that's a little bit more clear, and that one's going to look like that with resin on it. It's a lot more clear. So these are the ones with the white backings, and so you can see it, they look quite different. Now I've decided that I like this technique best, so that's the one that I'm going to be using for the Pardo one, which we still have to do. And what I'm going to do with the Pardo one, we haven't put a backing on this one yet. So what I'm going to do later on, I'll show you what I do, is I'm going to make a backing, and instead of it being white, I'm going to have a kind of a marble between silver and pearl white. And that's going to change the background quite a bit for the opal once it's baked. It's going to darken it quite a bit, and so it's going to create a completely different effect. And so I wanted to show you guys what that looked like. But in the meantime, these need to go in the oven for about 20 minutes just to set the paint, and then we have to give them a good sand. So these ones where we cut the bead out first and then put the opal in, I'm really happy with the sides. We don't need to do a smear on those. They're quite tidy. You can see that I've antiqued the cracks so it looks like it's continuing around. These ones, however, I'm not as happy with the sides. As you can see, they're not as tidy as these ones, so I definitely prefer this technique, but I did want to show you what they look like. And I also prefer the cracks on these ones because I could control what the cracks looked like a bit more. And so I just wanted to show you that, and that's the one that we are going to be using for the Pardo. But anyway, pop these in the oven for 20 minutes and then I'll show you what I'm going to do with the Pardo. Okay, so now we're going to move on to that backing for the Pardo. And so I've got a piece of pearl white and a piece of silver, and these are both Primo. And so I just want to roll these out on the tile to make them into nice long snakes. And then we can start to marble them. So just quickly roll them out into a snake. It doesn't have to be even or anything like that. Just want it into a long enough snake that you're going to have enough to marble with. And now I don't want more silver than I have pearl white, so I'll just eyeball that, take off pieces as I need to. There we go. We'll pop those together, and I'm just going to squish them together so that they don't come apart, because that's painful whenever that happens. We'll take them and we'll twist. Just like that. There we go. Then I'll fold and fold, and then just squish that together. Okay, and then I'm just gonna roll it out, and you can see that sometimes I don't like sticking together, so you have to kind of convince them that they should stick together just by squishing them. There we go. Okay, and now I'm just going to twist again, and so you can see I have a somewhat even amount between the silver and the pearl white, which is what I want. And again, you can play with the backing a little bit more. You could put on black if you wanted to. The black might be a little bit harsh, but you could give it a try. Okay, then I'm just going to squish it up like this, and the point is to get those lines all distorted and up close to each other. And then we'll roll that out, and that is what we will use. Yeah. And I'm just going to squish this down, start squishing it to a plug. And then I can run it through the pasta machine, and then we'll use that. So you can see we have nice fine lines, and they're all distorted as well, which is quite important. Okay, so I'll run that through the thickest setting, just like that. We've got a little bit of an air bubble there, so I'll just smooth that out. Then I'll just bring this over so that I know how much I'm going to need. So this is the backing. So I'm going to need to just stretch it out to make the width a little bit more. Okay, and then I'm going to lengthen it. I'm going to take it down to my middle setting, which is a 4, and I'm widening these stripes out. Take it down one more setting to my 3. There we are. And I think I like this side better, so that's going to go face down onto my piece, and then I'll just smooth it out. And now again, because we have a metallic backing, it's also going to make a little bit of a quite a bit of a difference versus just the plain white backing that we had last time. So it's really going to vary depending on what your backing is. Okay, there we are. Now what I'll do is I'll just cut out beads like I did before, and then I'll heat gun them, crack them, antique them, and then I'll show you what they look like once I have baked them, and then I'll show you what they look like after I've antiqued them again as well, so you can see the difference between what the Primo looked like and what this will look like before it's antiqued and after it's antiqued. And this I will bake at Primo's recommended temperature, by the way. Okay, so all of our beads have been antiqued, and so here is the first lot that we made, where we made the beads and then cracked them. So that's what they look like. I've given them a bit of a sand just to see what they're going to look like and to clear up some paint. So you can see that they look nice and clear now. So that's the first lot. Then we have this lot where we crackled the sheet and then cut out the pieces. And these ones I don't like as much as these ones, but that's what they look like. So I'm quite happy with those in a way. And then I've done the powder ones and I've antiqued them as well. And so here's what they look like. And these ones are actually my favourite out of all of them, because I just really like how nice and clean they look. Because of the powder, the pattern has stayed quite white. Well, these ones have changed a little bit and gone a little bit more yellow, and so you get more greenish tint. Well, these ones are a little bit more on the blue tint. So that's quite nice. So all in all of them look similar but different, and so you can make up your mind which one you want to make, or if you want to, you can make all of them. So now what I want to do is I actually want to clean up, smear these sides. So I'm going to do these ones and these ones and these ones, especially these ones. So with these, not the powder ones, I'm going to be using pearl white along the edges, and with the powder ones I'm going to be using silver along the edges. So I'm just going to move these all out the way, and I'm going to start with the powder ones actually. And it's just basically the same process for all of them. Just take a bit of your clay, and as with the powder ones I'm using silver, and roll it into a snake. And smear along the edge. And just clean up your top area as well. I apologise for the noise that the neighbour is making. They're leaf blowers. Okay, then you carry on smearing along the edge. And you just carry on going all the way around until you meet up on the other side, and you might have to smear over the same area twice to get the clay to stick, just like that. And just remember this tip as well, you want to smear that too. Okay, and then you want to take your finger and gently smooth. You can use your palm as well. And just clear up anything that's on the front. We're going to give it a sand, so we will be able to clear up any excess, but it's better to do it while it's raw. And then just make sure that you're cleaning up the back as well, and the sides, and just making everything look as tidy as possible. Now if you get into little gaps like that, you want to try and pick that out. So let me just bring over a pick. And just get that out of that hole, because I don't want that there. Okay, and then you can use your knife or your blade or your pick to just help get rid of any parts that are sitting on the surface. And just smooth it out, get rid of fingerprints. And then pop it all back in the oven for another half an hour at Primo's recommended temperature. And so that is what it's going to look like afterwards. It's going to have a slight silver border, but it's going to make the edges look much more tidy. So it's optional, you don't have to, but you can see that the edges over here just look a lot better. So I'll continue doing that with all of the beads. Then when I'm done, I can show you how to sand everything. Okay, so all of our beads are now out of the oven, and we are ready to start sanding them. So I've sanded all of them except this one, and we don't want to worry about sanding the fronts. Unless you have a lot of excess paint, you don't really need to sand the fronts, because we will be putting resin over this, and it's going to be very hard to sand it anyway, because you're going to sand the cracks and it's just not going to work very well. So I wouldn't sand the fronts unless there's a problem that you see. All I'd do really is just grab your sanding paper or wet dry sandpaper and just start sanding the edges. And also you do want to sand just around these edges over here where you were smearing the clay, because you can get some of the pearl white onto your opal and you don't want that. So just gently sand around those edges. Just like that. And then you'll sand these edges and you'll sand the back. And you'll start with your lowest grit, which in my case is a 400, and work your way all the way up to your highest grit, which in my case is an 8000. And then I can show you how to resin them. Okay, so all of our beads are sanded, so now I want to proceed with resining them. So I'm using an ice resin plunger, as you can see here. This helps me measure out the resin accurately. You can use the 2-part bottles if you want, but then you have to measure them out by hand, and that can be a little bit tricky. So I'm going to be using this plunger. You can also use a 1-part resin like Magic Gloss or Ultradome. Any resin will work, so long as you've tested it, of course, or other people have recommended it to you, but I prefer to use ice resin. So I'm going to bring over our measuring cup. And we don't really need a measuring cup because I don't have to measure this out. But I do want to see roughly how much I'm pouring, because I need quite a bit for today's batch. So let me just see where my measurements are. Here we are. I think I want to pour around 15 mils of resin. Now I'm letting it rest for a little while. I want the bubbles to move to the top, and then I'll gently start pushing on the lever. Almost there. Now you're probably thinking, oh, you're using up so much resin. Now I have a little tip to show you. As soon as I've mixed up this resin, so once I've mixed up the resin and put it on the beads so they're all out of the way and I don't have to worry about curing time, I want to show you a quick tip for how to reuse this plunger. Now we've got that all mixed up or poured out. Now I want to mix it up with my skewer, and this can take a little while, especially with this amount of resin, because you need to make sure that you do mix it up properly. The plunger does measure it out accurately for you, so you get a completely accurate pour, but it's still up to you to make sure to mix it properly, and if you don't mix it properly it's not going to cure. And so I like to mix until I can see no more streaks, and then after that I'll continue mixing for another minute or so just to make sure that it is completely mixed. And you generally have to mix longer with these larger amounts, and so I'd probably mix this for about 5 minutes to make sure that it is completely mixed. But just to be sure, if you end up getting this clear, just make sure that you mix for another minute or so just to make sure that it is properly mixed. And now ice resin has a very long working time, so you don't have to worry about it curing on you. It has at least a half an hour working time in hot weather, and in winter when it's quite cold you can have up to an hour's working time. So it's a nice resin to work within, so you don't have to worry about it curing on you, which is nice to know. And so I'll continue mixing this for a good 5 minutes or so until it's clear, and then I'll mix for another minute. And then on top of that I will let it rest for at least 30 seconds to let those bubbles rise to the surface. I might even leave it to a minute to rest, and then I will show you how to lay the beads. And then once the beads are cured for 24 hours, I'm going to show you how to pop some Renaissance on the back and sides and how to drill them, and then we can assemble them. Okay, So now I'm going to bring over my resining mat, and excuse the terrible colour, that's the only colour that I can get, so I'll just turn that down a bit for you. My resin is resting over there, and so now I'm going to bring over each of these beads. And now I'm just going to show you the focal pieces. For the moment I'm going to resin the other ones of course, but I just wanted to show you these ones in the resining process so that you can see what they look like when you put the resin on. Okay, so I'll just take some of the resin and just start off slow and spread it across your bead. Now we might have to do a second coat, we'll have to see. I will probably sit and tend to this for the next hour or so just to make sure that the resin sits where I want it to sit and everything. Resin doesn't really like to be left alone in the first hour or so because you can get spills, you might want to pop some of the air bubbles, and so it's just best to give yourself an hour or so to make sure that you have enough time to tend to the resin and make sure that everything's going as planned. So you can see that everything's popping out on that one. Now I will do this one. You can see that the resin just instantly brightens up those colours and it brings out that acrylic. And now these are lying flat and so I can't twist them around, but later on once these are cured I can show you what they look like once I have finished resining them and let them cure. So I'll just spread those over and then I'll do the other one as well. Okay, so I have finished resining them. Now you can see that these two have a little spill on their sides. Now that is quite common with ice resin, and I'll show you later on when these are cured what I like to do about those spills, and this is why I'm saying you want to sit with these for a little while and just make sure that you're happy with them, because these spills can go on for so long that you lose a lot of the resin on top over here, and so you might want to go back when it starts getting just kind of like a honey-like texture, which is after about the first hour or so, depending on how hot it is. If it's quite hot it can be after a half an hour, if it's cold it can be after an hour, so just check on it every now and then by poking a skewer into it. After 3 hours I wouldn't do that because then you'll mark your resin, but during the first 2 hours or so just poke it with your skewer every now and then to see how it's doing. And then if you've lost too much resin on top over here, you can always just gently move that along like that, and you can see that this little reservoir is filled. You'll scoop that up and pop it back onto the top of your bead, and so it wastes very little resin that way. And when it's a honey-like texture it will go right back onto the bead and you won't have the drip problem. It's just right now when it's really liquidy, it's kind of like balancing water on top of the bead, and so you can understand that there would be quite a few spills. So I'll let those cure for 24 hours, and in the meantime I'll show you that tip that I was going to show you. Okay, so while those are curing, let me show you what to do with this. So first you want to let the resin sink down to the bottom over here, so it's out of the way. And you want to lift this up and very, very gently press the resin upwards until you reach something like that. So it's quite hard for me to show you there, but you want to have about that much air left. Okay, then make sure that you get this right. There's a part A and there's a part B. The resin is part A and the hardener is part B. Now the hardener generally will have a slightly yellow tint and the resin will have a clear tint, as you can see here. So this will be part B, which is the hardener. If you can't tell the difference, then it's best to let this sit for a little while. The resin, this part yellows after about a month or two, so if you can't tell then don't fill it up because you might get mixed up and then it's all problems from there. You only want to do this if you can tell which one's which. So I know that that one's the hardener, so I'm going to do that one first. And so you're going to need the large bottles for this, and now these are much cheaper than the plunger, and so I prefer to buy these. What you want to do is you want to stick that cap down into that hole over there, and then just gently press, and at the same time start. It's a little hard for me to show you this, but what you want to do is you want to start pulling this plunger down so that you're sucking this out. There we are. So I'm pulling until I reach the bottom. Then I'll gently take that out, and so you can see that we have refilled pot B. Close that up, move out the way, bring over pot A. Now this is a little bit of a hard process. If you've got another pair of hands and you can get somebody to come help you, that is always best. You would be the one, or one of you would be the one to hold over here, and the other one would be the one to pull the plunger down. Now you always want to leave a small gap of air about that big, and so I'm going to push that right up, then pop this resin in, and I'm going to start squeezing the bottle, and then I pulled on it to get the resin out. Then you want to let go of the bottle, very gently ease it out, because otherwise the resin can spurt out, I have found. It's a little bit of a sticky process, you have to be a little careful. So if you're not good at this, it's best to wear gloves, because otherwise you could end up with resin all over yourself. Okay, so I'll pop that back in and then pull that resin out. And so the second one takes a little bit longer, as you can see, because the first one you just pull the resin out. The second one you have to do it in little bits because of this bit over here. So you'd carry on doing that until this pot's full. So I'll show you what that looks like when I'm done. Okay, so I've got that pot A level with pot B. Now I'm going to slide that lid on, and so hopefully, not sure if you can see that, there you go, you can see that they're about the same level. You don't have to get them exactly to the millimeter level, but you want to get them as close as you possibly can. But now you can see that I have refilled my plunger, and so I can reuse this next time I want to do a project, and it means that my resin will be measured out accurately for me. So then you want to make sure that the lid's on properly. Then you want to bring over some wet wipes or a wet cloth with some detergent on it, and just give this a quick wipe down, because it will get a little sticky after that process and you don't really want that all over the place. So just wipe off the top here, wipe off the cylinders, clean off your hands as well, because you don't want to be replacing it. And this plunger bit actually gets really quite manky, so just make sure to clean it each time you do this to keep it in as best condition as you can. And it will eventually get really sticky, I guess. I'm not sure how many times, how long it takes for that, because I haven't got to that point yet. Mine is still doing okay, but you will eventually most likely want to buy another plunger, because it will have gotten a little bit manky. But again, it's cheaper, means you can use more resin, because the amount of resin that you get in this is quite little. And so it's just a really cool tip that I found out about the other day, and so I thought I'd share it with you guys because it's so cool. And so I hope that that was helpful to you. And so now I'll just go pack this back where my other resin stuff is, and then I'll come and show you in 24 hours time what our beads look like. I'll see you there. Okay, so while those are being resined and are being cured, I thought that I'd bring over the leftovers from our project with our kind of half-baked pieces of clay and offcuts from our beads, and see what I can do with them. And I just wanted to do that on camera so you guys can see what they look like. So I've taken everything from all of them, so we've got powder, Polymer, and everything mixed in here all together. And I'm just trying to compress it all together into one ball. And now this has got little baked pieces in it as well, so it's going to, if you were to just churn this together into one colour or something like that, it wouldn't really work all that well because you'd have baked pieces in here. And so this is why I want to see if I can make something interesting with it, because otherwise it's fairly useless. So I've got that all compressed into a cylinder, and now I'm busy rolling it out and squishing it back together, just to really squish this all together. Now I've got a few ideas for what I want to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut this in half at this point. And that's what it looks like inside. Just going to squish this together. Now this might be a complete fail and then you wouldn't see it, of course, but if this does end up on the video, then it was a success. So if you're watching it right now, then it turned out okay. Okay, so I've got it like that. Now I want to start twisting and rolling, twisting and rolling, and you might find that it breaks apart a little bit, so you might have to squish it back together a little bit. That's what I'm doing here. And then I'll roll and twist, and we might get something that looks kind of like agate here, because we'll have these crackled edges and everything, so it could look really cool. I'm just squishing it together to make sure that it all stays in one log, and roll it out and twist a little bit more. And I don't want to overdo this, so I think that should be enough. Then what I want to do is I want to squish that flat, just like this. Bring over a roller, roll it flat, just like that. Now pick this up, see what this end looks like. I actually prefer this end. This end looks much better. Now what I just want to do is gently start pushing it in on itself so that we shorten this piece of clay. This is a bit of a delicate process, so take your time and make sure that you do it properly. Just continue squishing inwards. And that crackled clay in there really looks quite interesting. So that other piece that I cut off, I might turn into this as well if this turns out quite nice. Okay, there we are. Now what I want to do is I want to roll this through my pasta machine on the thickest setting. There we are. Then I'm going to bring over a piercing pin, anything like a skewer or preferably metal that has a sharp point, that will work. And then what I want to do is I want to go over to these lines and be a little specific. I don't want to just be random with this. And I'll take this and I want to frill the edges by creating lines. Now I don't want to do this with all the lines. Some of them, like over here, I want to keep straight, but some areas in the lines I might want to turn into little frills. So I'll go around texturing this, and then what you do after you've textured it is you would then flatten it, which is what I'll show you as soon as I'm done. But I'm just going to go around texturing it for the moment. Okay, so I've textured it up quite a bit. So now I'm going to bring over my roller and flatten this out. So I'll roll one way and then the other way until I have all of those streaks flattened. And this should leave me with slight frilling around some of the edges, which which is what I want. So that it will give just a little bit more texture to it. So I'm wondering whether this looks more like agate, or whether it looks more like almost a faux acrylic pour, I guess. Because it kind of does look like that, because you've got these little areas where these bubbles pop up, and so it's looking really cool in my opinion. I really like it. So I'm happy I showed that on camera. So I guess you guys will see this after all. There we are. Flatten it out good and proper. And then just take over your finger and feel it just to make sure. And now if you're not happy with it and you think that some other areas need frilling, you can always just go back and do some more. But I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm gonna pick that up. And I did think that some of the lines needed some distortion. So, like what we did with the opal beforehand, I'm gonna kind of squish these up in a weird way to get them to sit a little strange, because I want it to be a little bit more wiggly. And you can use your fingers to do this too. Just don't smear it. The important thing is to hold down enough that you're dragging it, and dragging the entire piece of clay and not smearing that upper part, because otherwise you'll end up smudging your clay and then it just won't look very good. So make sure that you drag it properly if you're going to do that. There you go. And this will widen and shorten some lines, and it will just make it look more interesting. Then you'll flatten it out again, and this is a really nice veneer that you can use. And so I'm not going to show you what I do with it, because I'm not going to use it just yet anyway, but I did want to show you what you can do with the leftovers. And so it looks really cool. Now some areas are going to go translucent, some areas are going to stay opaque, and so it's going to look really cool. So this is what that end looks like without the frills. This is what it looks like with the frills. So it's just a slight detail here and there, but it does make a bit of a difference. So I quite like that. So I'll put that aside, and I think I'm going to make something with this now. And I'll show you what I do with this one too, because I just want to show you on camera, because generally whenever I switch off the camera, that's when something interesting happens, and then it feels silly because I didn't do it on camera. So I'll do it this time. Okay, so this one, what I think I want to do is I'm going to roll this out like that, and then I'm going to squish it back up on itself, kind of like I did with my feathered Natasha bead on YouTube, or pine tree Natasha bead. I can't quite remember what it was called. Anyway, squish it all up. This might not work, might work, we'll see. Okay, and then I'm just gonna bring over my roller and use that to kind of help me mold these edges to get it more into a symmetrical, somewhat clean triangle shape. There we go. And I'm going to bring over my tissue blade, and I'm going to slice down the middle. And so those pieces dragged, which is fine. With the dichroic in here, the pieces will drag. So what I'm doing with this one, instead of trying to do an agate look, I'm trying to slice off pieces. And so you can see that this dichroic's a bit of a problem, because it's catching on the blade here and dragging. But there we are. I just needed to break up into pieces. That. And then I want to roll it through in one direction and fold. I have a feeling this isn't going to work, but you know, It's always worth trying. Run that through again, and I'm always running in the same direction. We'll see what happens. And I always check which side I like the best. Through again. Okay, and then I'm going to keep that, because I quite like that marbly look. Then I'm going to bring over my pin again, and I'm going to streak it. Just like this. To create some interest. And then I'll go in the opposite direction as well. Got a little piece that we can stick in. And then I'm going to go in the opposite direction as well. So I'm not making these lines too close together because I need space to go back in the opposite direction, which I'll show you in just a second. There you go. I'll go in the opposite direction. And I want them to be going, I don't want them to be going, I want them to be going, sorry, I'm having brain fog here. I don't want them parallel with the lines. I want them perpendicular to the lines. There you go. Wasn't able to think of the word there. Knew what I was trying to say. Anyway, I want them to be going perpendicular to the lines. It doesn't matter whether I'm streaking this way or that way. I want to go both ways, but I don't want to be going this way with the lines. I want it to be against the lines. You can see I'm getting quite a few streaks here. And now the point is not to go too deep. The point is to just make lots of them and drag the clay as you go. Then flatten it with your roller. And this will just add a bit. This one I don't like it as much as the other one, but it's a little different, and so I'm glad I did this bit. And so with that silver clay in there and that pearl clay that we have in there, we formed almost a little bit of a mica shift over here, which looks really interesting. There we go. Just feel that's flat. Yep. Now I'll just bring over my blade again. So that's what it looks like on that side. Now what I want to do is I just want to twist these lines around, kind of like we did with the other one, so we don't have all straight pieces. We want the lines to be natural looking. There we go. And we'll flatten that out again. It's quite important with things that look somewhat like stone to not have straight lines in them, and so that's the best way I found to distort the lines. There we go. That's nice and flat, and that's quite interesting. You compare that up with the other one. So I'll bring that over there, and bring that over there, and I'll show you both of them. So both of those look super interesting, and I'm quite happy I tried a different one with this one because this one turned out pretty nicely as well. So that's what I did for the leftovers, and so I'll just store those in compatible plastic bags until I need them, and then I'll pair them up with something else and make a project out of them. So I might do a video on that, I might not, we'll see, but in the meantime that's basically what I did with the leftovers. So now we'll wait for those beads to cure, and then we can move on to assembling our project. Okay, so all of our pieces have cured, and so I've cleaned up all of them except this one, and so you can see that it has a bit of resin on the back and a bit on the side there and a bit on that side there. So what you're going to need is a craft knife, and definitely only use a craft knife because tissue blades would be too dangerous. And you want to brace it against your fingers and figure out where the resin is. So hopefully you can see that there's a little bit of a strip of resin here. And just slit the resin on that side Find any resin that is on this side and slit it as close to the top of the bead as possible. And this is just going to break the connection between it and the resin on top. If you were to keep that connection and peel it off, you'd find that the top would probably peel off as well. Then just gently pick the back. Now I'm doing this about 15 hours into the curing time. So the resin hasn't completely cured. It's cured so that if I press on it and get a fingerprint into, and if I press onto it, I can't get a fingerprint into it. But it's still soft enough that it's bending. Once it's fully cured, it will become quite brittle and glass-like. So you want to get this while it's still somewhat flexible. And this can be any time between 12 to 15 hours after you started the curing process. So just take your knife and pick away anything on the back. Then gently take it and lift up the side, the resin over here, and peel that away. And the same on this side. Gently take the edge of your knife and just be careful not to scratch your bead. And pick up that resin and put it away. And then that will leave you with a nice bead. Now this has a few fingerprints on it. Just gently smooth it with your palm and those fingerprints will be gone. Then just take that resin, pop it in the bin, and you're done. And then I always like to use a silicone mat for my curing, because anything that's left on the mat you can just easily pop out of the mat and you can reuse it. So silicone is definitely my preferred curing surface. Now also, you're going to want to, whenever you have finished with your pot, if you want to reuse it, just stick your mixing stick, which is a skewer for me, into the bottom of the cup like that. Wait for it to cure, and then gently start wiggling it. And now you want to get this at the 15 to 12 hour mark as well, because then it will still be flexible and it will just come straight out the bottom, and now you can use that cup again. And just break off that end and throw that in the bin, because that's pretty useless to you, and now you can use this again. Okay, so that's all there is to the resin. So now I'm going to bring these all over and show you what they look like. Okay, so I have finished drilling all of these, and so we are now ready to start assembling our necklace. So I've got a piece of Acuflex, and I buy this off of Samantha Gems, and I'm just going to grab one end, and I just need to trim it there. Then I'm going to grab a Charlotte crimp, and you can buy these off of eBay. Then I'm going to take a crimp, slide that on too, but only let it go down a tiny way, leaving a little bit of a tail. Then I'll squish that with my bent nose pliers, bring the Charlotte crimp back up so that it covers the crimp, and then squeeze that tight around the crimp so that it's holding it, and that way it's secure on the end of the cord. I just need to get these two loops over here to meet up. There we go. Then I will bring over a jump ring, open that up, slide that through the loop, and then bring over one piece of my clasp, and then close the jump ring again. Okay, then I'm going to bring over a 4mm black onyx bead, string that on. Then I'll bring over one of my beads, string that on, then another one of the onyx, and so on until I have strung all of my beads. Okay, and once they're all strung on, you want to take the other end, bring over a Charlotte crimp, a crimp, and we're basically just repeating what we did on the other side. Squish that crimp, bring the Charlotte crimp over and close, Squeeze that shut with your pliers. Bring over a jump ring. Slip that on. And pop on the last piece of your clasp. Close that up. And that is your necklace. So let me just slide that into place. There we are. That's all there is to it really. So now you can do the same for the other ones if you wanted to. You might have an entirely different design concept in mind. So if you did go and check out, if you want a different design, go check out Pinterest. There's a bunch of different ideas on there. I do have other tutorials on YouTube and on Etsy, and if you're watching this on Patreon, I have a bunch of backlog for you guys to check out, so go and have a look there. I've got a few different design concepts there as well that you can check out if you want to use the opal in that sort of a way. You might even just want to use the opal as a design element in a piece as only part, but I wanted to just make the entire necklace opal today because I just thought that it was really pretty and it's a nice way just to show off the entire technique. So I do hope that that tutorial was helpful to you, and if it was, please do let me know, and please do send me photos of what you do using this technique, as that is always exciting for me. I love seeing you guys' photos. And play around with the technique, see what you can do with it. Different backings will look a little different. Black would actually look quite interesting. A dark silver to black look could look really interesting, because you'll still get these sparkly elements, but these lines would be a little less, quite a bit more blended together, so it'd look quite different. So play around with the backings, and also play around with translucent clays. You're going to get a different effect depending on the translucent clay. As you can see with these two are complete. The only difference between these two is the translucent clay that we used, and so you can see there's quite a difference between the colours in those two. So play around with your translucent clays. Play around with some of the alcohol inks as well. You don't just have to have blue, you could have some reds and oranges. I do believe that opal comes in some greens as well. You could maybe have some different coloured blues in the same piece, so you could alternate between a dark blue and a light blue. There's so many different things that you can do, so please do play around with it, and do send in photos, as I love seeing those. And as always, I hope to see you in the next tutorial. Bye for now.